with me Rob Chesnut, who is the author of a new book out called Intentional Integrity. Rob is also the former Chief Counsel and Chief Ethics Officer of Airbnb Global. Welcome, Rob.
Kathy, thanks for having me.
So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background, because it's a big background.
Well, I'm old, I guess. I've been around a while. I've done a few different things. I was a federal prosecutor early in my career. I used to prosecute drug dealers and spies and bank robbers and the like. From there, I moved into the tech world. I was an early employee at eBay, where I built out their US, North America legal team. And then I started their trust and safety department, making all the rules around what you could buy and sell on eBay and how to stop fraud on eBay and the like. And from there, I moved to an education company called Chegg. The company went public a few years back, and then I was the general counsel at Airbnb.
So I guess reading your book, which I devoured, and I would encourage everybody to go out and get a copy either on Amazon or buy a hard copy. What I sort of took out about your criminal or federal prosecutor experience was, we want to avoid litigation at any cost. You know, let's do it right in the beginning, because the law isn't always perfect in terms of what it can do to help people, whether it's access to justice or whatever it might be. Would that be my understanding? Because you sound a little disillusioned with the law, the way you leave, and then you end up in the corporate world.
Well, the problem with being a prosecutor, I think, is that it's a little too late, right? Yeah. I prefer proactive. I think I prefer an approach where, we're helping people avoid circumstances in life where they might feel moved to rob a bank. And there's a lot of sad stories, frankly, when you're a prosecutor. So I'm a big believer in the power of business to change lives and do a lot of good in the world. And that was what compelled me to move out of the prosecution world.
Yeah, I guess as I've mentioned in our sort of briefing conversation, we're in the middle of a siege mentality in Australia. We've got corporate scandals after corporate scandals erupting in both the private enterprise and in our governments. And it's been widely reported daily in the press, like here comes another directorship that's, on the nose, etc. So it's at leadership level. What would be your advice when all of this is going on? How do you start to clean it up with integrity, following the principles? Because, you can't start from the ground up. You've got to work backwards in this situation.
Well, I think it starts with the recognition that the world's changing. And, I think integrity used to be doing the right thing even when no one's watching. I think in today's world, everybody's always watching. We have an unprecedented level of transparency. People are speaking up and pointing out problems like never before. I mean, when I was growing up, there were 3 news stations. Now everybody's their own news station. So I think it has to start with a recognition that if you're a leader in government, if you're a leader in business, the world's watching. And you have to assume that everything you say, everything you write, everything you do is going to be put out there for the world to look at. And frankly, I think that that's sort of a base understanding should encourage much better behavior. It's time we sort of get past this idea that we can manipulate outcomes if we're leaders and that we're going to get away with certain things. Let's start with a fundamental understanding that everything we do is going to be laid out there for the world to see. And we actually should be expecting better from our leaders. We need better from our leaders. And I think there's an obligation to think about more than just lining your pockets. There's got to be an expectation from all of us that our leaders need to do good in the world.
Yeah, you talk about the nature of business changing in terms of accountability just to shareholders, that stakeholders are much broader. Can you talk to a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, for decades, Kathy, we've been living in this world of, corporate purpose is tied to shareholder value. The economist Milton Friedman an academic by the name of Michael Jensen came up with this great idea to govern corporate behavior. Corporate behavior is good if it increases shareholder value. So if it gets the stock price up, then it's good. And if it doesn't, then you shouldn't worry about it. The problem with this kind of thinking is that it encourages a lot of ethical corner cutting and a lot of short-term thinking. Frankly, I think it actually has given leaders almost some sort of an ethical justification for doing things like dumping carbon into the air and not worrying about it, or buying goods from somebody on the other side of the world who might treat their workers poorly, because hey, it lowers our cost, or it's going to help get the share price up this quarter, and so therefore I feel okay, I feel good, like that's somehow an all right thing to do. Well, the world has, I think, suffered quite a bit under this kind of thinking. And now Michael Jensen, the academic who came up with it, now admits that it was a terrible mistake and been awful for the world. And I think why should shareholders be the primary or the only stakeholders when a company is operating? I mean, when you think about it, companies actually should have a number of stakeholders. What about their customers? Shouldn't their customers be thought of as important stakeholders when you're making decisions? What about your employees? What about the communities where the companies are operating? Now, this isn't to say that shareholders aren't important. Of course they are. Companies need to make money. Profit, I think, is a necessary part of doing business, and it's good. On the other hand, it's not the only thing. And if it's the only thing that guides your actions, it's actually going to lead companies down some very bad ethical paths. And frankly, the interesting thing, Kathy, is that you're not even maximizing the long-term value of a company. Data shows that companies that operate with a purpose, if they operate with integrity, they actually outperform stock markets. They outperform their competitors. So the irony of all this is that doing good actually is good financially. And if all you're worried about is hitting a quarterly number, you're not going to maximize the true value of the company, which is something, obviously that a lot of people are used to doing.
So with Airbnb, how did you go from being chief counsel to knocking on the CEO's door, I suppose, and saying, look, we really need to take ethics a lot more seriously, and I want to go out there and educate our troops?
Well, it started, I think, with Uber for me. Uber was right down the street from us. And, well known all of the ethical troubles they started getting into. I think a woman by the name of Susan Fowler's blog post started it. And it really rocked the company. And again, I'm a big believer in learning from other people's mistakes. And I started seeing Uber wasn't an anomaly. We were seeing leaders and companies being called out right and left in ways that we hadn't seen before. And it caused me to sit down with our CEO, Brian Chesnut, and have a conversation about, what kind of a company do we want to be? How can we drive integrity into the culture of our company so that maybe we can avoid some of the problems that some of these other companies are having? And, we didn't have all the answers that day, but Brian, in his typical fashion, looked at me and said, go big. So that's what we did. We started thinking about how do companies talk about integrity? And the truth is, most companies don't talk about it at all. Most companies, they'll have a code of ethics, but the code of ethics is something the law firm gave them, right? The law firm sends over this code of ethics and say, here, use this. Or even worse, a lot of companies just go online. They find somebody else's code of ethics. They steal it. They copy and paste it, right? They put their own company's name at the top, and then they email it out to everybody. And you know what they say? They say, check a box. Check this box saying you've read it and are going to live by it. And then, thank goodness, we've dealt with all that ethical stuff. Now we can get back to business. The reality is, when you think about it, and Kathy, that sends a terrible message. It sends the message that this is just a check the box compliance exercise. It ought to be a lot more than that. So, what we decided that we needed to do was have a real conversation with people about it, led by leaders, and talk about why having integrity is something we need to build into our culture, and why we think it actually will make us a much better, stronger company in the long run.
what I noticed is that, you know, the lovely case studies on ethics all the way throughout the book that you can think for yourself, you know, what would I do in that scenario, is there often isn't a perfect answer. You've really got to think hard about what is the moral thing to do, what is the right thing for our company, and what is the right thing for our people and the broader community.
Yeah. You know what? We could all agree on a few basics like lying, cheating, and stealing. Right? But ethics isn't always that easy. A lot of times it comes in different shades of gray. And that gray enables people to talk themselves into something that is in their self-interest. Like, oh, this is really okay because, and then they're able to rationalize it. And that's where you start going off down ethical dark alleys that will get you in trouble. So, you know, I think it's important to acknowledge that some of this stuff can be gray, but that you need to have a conversation about it. Ambiguity and silence are the enemies of integrity, right? Where no one really talks about what it means, or where what it means isn't clear, companies get themselves in trouble. So I think if you're going to try to take a path of integrity, you've got to be very clear right up front about what's your purpose. What's your North Star? Why does your company exist? Profit is not purpose. Profit's an important part of running a business, but you need some reason that your company is good for the world. What is it doing that is positive for the world? And you need to make decisions according to that North Star. And when you understand your North Star or your purpose, and you've got a code of ethics that you've thought about that provides you some guidance, and then you're willing to have an open conversation about it, that clarity provides a lot less room for people to rationalize and come up with bad ethical decisions. I mean, look at Boeing. You know, Boeing, I think, got themselves in trouble recently with the safety issue with their planes because they didn't explicitly talk about their stakeholders, including the people that are flying on the airplane, right? What they were worried about was our financial stakeholders, and we've got to get a plane out because we've got a competitor to compete with. So we need to get that stock price up. But if they had carefully thought about the fact that there are other stakeholders, right? There's the entire aviation community, including the customers that are flying on the planes that they're building. That, I think, would have helped them make better decisions.
So you talk about embedding intentional integrity at every level throughout the organization. And one of the examples you use is the intranet for your people and the big button that you put so people could see it. I mean, how did you get people coming to you to say, here's an opportunity for us to do something around ethics, or did you have to drive it all yourself?
Well, I think it has to start with a leader in a company. I think people are often uncomfortable talking about integrity. But if a leader starts to talk about it, what I was surprised was how it resonated with people. Like, there are so many people for whom this means a lot. You know, I underestimated a bit, I think, where we work, where we do our work, Kathy. This is our life's work. You know what? The first question of anytime anybody interviews me, right? What do they talk about? Where'd you work? And I think we all want to be proud of that. We make a paycheck, but we want more than a paycheck. We want to feel as though we did some good in the world while we were going to work. And we want to be proud of that place. And when I started talking about driving integrity into the culture and having that kind of an open conversation, the reaction was really surprising. I was thinking some young people particularly be looking at me like, oh yeah, some old guy talking about morality, the lawyer. How dare he? I got quite the opposite. I got actually some people moved to tears after presentations, coming up and talking to me and saying, Rob, I've never been at a place where a leader actually stood up and talked about this and talked about why it was important. You have no idea how proud I am to work at a company that cares about this. You know, just a little effort in this regard, Kathy, that is followed up with actions that are ethical, means the world and can actually be really inspiring to your employees and your customers.
How did you measure that it was working? You know, what did you put in place?
It depends. We had a number of elements of the program. So let's take orientation. What better time to have a conversation with employees about what's important to your culture and how you want to operate with integrity than right at the beginning when they start. So Airbnb has orientation week where we have 25 classes, and people are given the chance after the week to rate in a survey all of the classes that they took. Number one class week after week was the 1 hour on ethics, believe it or not. So we watch the reaction of new employees through that survey. We do employee surveys throughout the year to get an impression of whether we are actually walking the talk and whether people believe that the company, in fact, acts with integrity. We do ethics videos, not these 1 hour canned things, but we actually made our own. We made them short. I learned from my kids that people today want to watch YouTube for 3 or 4 minutes. They don't want to watch an hour. So we started making humorous, very casual videos once a month, 3 minutes on a different ethical topic. Here's the video camera equipment that we used to make the videos. It's my cell phone. That's it. And the acting was terrible. And I can say that because I was an actor in many of those videos. But we would then send these emails out with the video to everybody in the company, not required. Because I figured, you know what, if you got to require people to watch a video, they're going to resent it and they're not going to get anything out of it anyway. So we just sent it out to people. I didn't know how many people would watch it. Within a couple of months, we had 1,500 to 2,000 unique employees watching an ethics video voluntarily, writing in with ideas for the next videos, asking how they could participate in the videos. We had teams that would, in their offsites, do binge watching of the entire series. So I think part of this is it has to be leader-led, because otherwise people won't take it seriously. You have to have some fun with it, and you need to measure. We would watch the numbers on how many people were watching videos. We also watched the number of reports that we got about integrity issues, but we didn't watch it the same way a lot of companies watched it. I've talked to people at companies who say, oh, Rob, we really don't have integrity issues. Well, we've got a hotline and we hardly ever get any reports. And I looked at them and said, actually, that's the first sign of a problem, because people don't like hotlines. Yeah. Lawyers are scary. HR people are scary. And I don't want to be a whistleblower. So a lot of times people don't share ethical concerns. They don't raise questions because the only way to do it is to go to legal or go to become a whistleblower. So what we decided to do was we created a program where we spread ethics out throughout the company. We got it out of legal and out of HR. We have a group of ethics advisors, 30 people selected, diverse group all across the company. Got somebody in each of the offices. We got a couple of engineers, a couple of people in customer support, finance person, a salesperson, marketing. And we gave them training on the code of ethics. And then we sent them back to their team and we said to the teams, here's an ethics advisor for you, a colleague, somebody you work with. If you've got a question, if something doesn't seem right, or maybe you got a gift from a vendor wants to take you to a ball game, or they send you an expensive fruit basket, and you don't know whether you're allowed to take it or whether you can do it. There you got somebody right on your team. You can just ask them. And what we found was the number of questions that ethics advisors got far outnumbered all of the other issues that were brought to the attention of HR and legal, because people were comfortable just raising questions. We got nearly 100 inquiries to ethics advisors just in one quarter earlier this year. So you want it to be a comfortable conversation. You want it to feel like anybody can raise it and it's not going to be a huge deal, but it's going to be important to have the conversation. And that's one of the ways that we did it.
And I guess it was top of mind. If somebody's right there, I've just been given this fruit bowl. I'm not sure about this.
Yeah. And then you can look 3 seats down and there's somebody that knows the answer that you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That makes it comfortable for people. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to have an atmosphere where talking about integrity is actually the norm.
So you talk about whistleblowers, and you've mentioned that in your book, and I hear it from a legal perspective too, is like, oh, a whistleblower. But what you're really saying, if there's, I mean, take for example, Susan, she just spoke about a very strange year, and I'm not even sure she was intentionally whistleblowing. She was just speaking. And that's my experience when we talk to whistleblowers. They're just gobsmacked with what's gone on, and they want to speak up, and sometimes they're hurt emotionally in a very bad way. And you quite rightly point out these are not often perfect people. There's this notion that a whistleblower has got this very tidy, very clean life. Are you saying that if we have better transparency around integrity and ethics organisationally, then it's highly likely that a whistleblower would just go through those channels, that they would feel heard?
Whenever I've talked to whistleblowers, they often didn't want to make a huge deal out of it.
Yeah.
But what they found was they were frustrated that no one was paying attention. They didn't feel like they had anywhere to go. So I think it's important to put out the welcome mat for people who've got issues. And you put out the welcome mat by giving people multiple channels with which to report, really listening to them as human beings and taking them seriously. And I think when you do that, you can keep smaller issues smaller and resolve them. When you ignore them and where people don't feel like they've got anywhere to go and no one's paying attention, that's where these things can become bigger and bigger problems.
So what are some of the channels? I mean, you've mentioned the intranet, you've mentioned the ethics officers. I mean, obviously you thought about every touch point so that someone can raise a red flag.
Yeah, well, the hotline is one. But by the way, you can have multiple hotlines. We had a traditional hotline, but then it was brought up that a lot of people don't like going to the corporate intranet, particularly if they want to keep it anonymous or confidential. They're worried that somebody's going to track them the moment they're in the intranet. So we actually signed up for a startup called Vault. And what Vault does is Vault actually brings the hotline to your own cell phone. It's an app that you control on your cell phone, and you report anonymously through Vault. And therefore the company has no way of actually knowing who the report came from. And you're making it easier. Why do people have to hunt for 20 minutes through the internet to try to find the hotline? They can just look on their phone, get the app, and open it there and do it. Anything you can do to make it easier and send the message. A number of employees were like, wow, the companies really must want this. If instead of just having one hotline buried deep in the internet, we're actually doing something creative and different, partnering with a startup, putting it on a telephone. Obviously, we want legal. We get reports through legal. We get reports through HR. We get reports through people's managers. We get the reports through the ethics advisors. The goal for me isn't to make it nice and tidy and neat for legal, like just one channel. Might be great for legal, but that's not the way people actually want to report things. So for me, it's really about, let's create multiple channels where different people might have different comfort levels. Let's get the information so we can act on it.
So how did you deal with historic sexual harassment? I mean, that's, everyone's talking about sexual harassment, ending it now, but what we're seeing is still this wave of historic allegations.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, again, is creating different avenues for victims to report it. I mean, I've had people say, well, Rob, I don't understand why people aren't comfortable. They're hotlines and it's anonymous. And I said, well, think about it for a minute. If you're a victim of sexual harassment and you report it anonymously through a hotline, what's going to happen? Well, the company's going to take the report. They're not going to be able to interview you because you're anonymous. So they're going to go interview the perpetrator, right? So now the perpetrator knows who did the report because the perpetrator was the perpetrator. So now the perpetrator can retaliate and the victim can't get any protection because the company doesn't even know who they are. So anonymous hotlines are not necessarily the only answer here. I think what you need to do is you, as a company, create an environment where victims trust you to come forward and trust that you're going to do something about it. Part of it is just having that open and honest conversation. Part of the orientation that I told you about, I spend 10 minutes on sexual harassment and talk about how as a company, that's not the way that we would ever operate. And we even set policies in place to discourage that kind of activity. And I'll give you an example. I walked into an executive team meeting one day and talked to the executives about the Me Too, sexual harassment, and the imbalance of power between executives and victims. And I said, look, I don't think anybody should be put in the position in that kind of situation. Why don't we simply make a rule that executives will not engage in any romantic relationship of any kind, sexual romantic relationship, with anyone else at the company, even quote unquote consensual? Because frankly, it's very hard for there to be a consensual relationship in that kind of an employment environment where there's an imbalance of power. So let's just ban the relationships. Why don't we agree as a group that we just simply won't have any kind of relationship like that? And there was silence in the room for a minute. One of the people said, oh, Rob, we're all married or in relationships anyway. It shouldn't matter. And I said, it shouldn't, but yeah, based on what I'm reading, that doesn't stop people from doing it. No. So what are you going to do? And we actually went around the room, Kathy, and looked at each other in the eye. And one by one, everybody said, I'm in. So now what did we do? Well, we put it in our code of ethics that if you're on the executive team, you may not and will not engage in any romantic relationship of any kind. And if you do, by the way, the executive team member has violated the rules and will suffer the consequences. I don't think we broke a lot of hearts in the company, frankly, with this rule. But what I think we did do is send a message that having a workplace that's free of this sort of stuff is more important than any executive trying to use their position of power for sex. And by the way, what I also do is I went around to every member of the executive team every year and had a reminder conversation with them about it, just so we were all really clear, we're not going there. Another thing we did was, I noticed the pattern around sexual harassment. When there's a victim, and a victim does have the courage to file a complaint, the matter gets referred to mandatory arbitration because companies force them into mandatory arbitration. And then the matter usually gets settled. The victim gets money, and there's a non-disclosure agreement as part of the entire thing. So I asked the question, wait a minute, why do we need mandatory arbitration? Why can't an employee choose if they want to file a lawsuit against us in court where it be public? And the legal team kind of looked around and I was like, well, because it's better for the company. And I said, yeah, but I'm not really sure it's better for the company in the long run. What are we really afraid of? We got that many people suing us inside the company? No, we treat our employees well. So what am I afraid of? So we decided we would eliminate mandatory arbitration. And if an employee wants to sue us, they can choose whether they want to go to court or to arbitration. And the other thing we eliminated were those NDAs. We made it a policy that whenever we are settling a lawsuit against a customer or an employee, we would not put in any NDA around the facts of the lawsuit. So even if we disagree with what the person is saying, we think they've got the right to tell their side of the story, even in a settlement. So we do not use non-disclosure clauses in our agreements as a result. So now what we're doing is we're kind of clearing out all of the different things that create the environment where this is allowed to happen. And again, I think more companies need to go that route.
Did you get pushback? Because that's profound to say, we're not going to do NDAs.
Well, certainly some there's old ways of thinking. The old ways of thinking are, but what if there's bad press? And I said, well, I actually would rather deal with the bad press than to deal with allegations that we're hiding, that we're ashamed, that we're covering up. Because frankly, I think that kind of stuff is a lot worse. And if we shouldn't, what we should be doing is not doing anything that we're ashamed of. And if somebody does make a mistake, which happens, we ought to acknowledge the mistake, apologize, and move on. And I think the world will be more forgiving of us as a brand if we take the high road and say, you know what, we'll rather deal with the brand issues than to ever be accused of covering this sort of stuff up.
Yeah, but of course, this is only as good as if there is consequence management for leadership. Like, you've got to walk the talk. You can't have one lot of rules for everybody else and you don't act if something is really serious, like sexual harassment, for example.
And for that, you need a commitment from your CEO and your board, right? And fortunately, Brian Chesky, our CEO, believes in doing things the right way. And he was very clear with me right from the beginning that he believed this was the right way to go. And he'd back it up entirely. So if somebody, and everybody knew, if you violate the rules, there would be consequences regardless of who you were.
So you mentioned a little bit about moral clauses starting to be a trend in the US for senior executives. I asked around here in Australia, and to the best of my knowledge, we haven't really looked at that. But we have a situation of massive payouts for senior executives that are doing the wrong thing, and the victims left with nothing.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So what we would insist on, and again, this is something you have to be consistent about. You know, when you're hiring an executive, the time to deal with this, by the way, is not when you're firing an executive. The time to deal with it is when you're hiring an executive, because that's when the rules get set. Yeah. So my rule would be that if you were engaged in misconduct, that you were not going to get a payout. Now, there's always going to be arguments and disagreements about what constitutes misconduct and the like, and who will decide it. And on those things that we could have a conversation. But I would never wanted to be in a position where we had to let an executive go due to some sort of misconduct on their part and had to pay them out a big chunk of money. First of all, it's embarrassing. And again, you have to assume these days, like I said earlier, Kathy, it's all going to come out. So not only is it embarrassing, but it's the wrong thing to do. So I would be very careful when we were bringing on new executives and we were signing agreements, that the agreement clearly would give us the right to discharge someone when there was misconduct. And if the misconduct rose to a serious enough level, that it would cancel out any clauses where they would be entitled to any payout as they went out the door. I think that, by the way, improves behavior. If everybody knows, look, if I do something wrong, I lose my job here, not only am I going to lose my job, but I'm going to lose any golden parachute that might be coming my way otherwise.
And we've got quite a long way to go here, and I'm hoping this conversation will start to prompt those conversations. What about diversity and inclusion? How did you embed that within your intentional integrity and with your ethics officers?
I think it started with a belief that diversity is a powerful business advantage. That as a human being, what makes you different is actually what makes you valuable in the workplace. You know what? I'll give you an example of it. You know, when we, back in 2016, Airbnb was really hit with a number of allegations around discrimination on its platform. That is, Airbnb some hosts were allegedly, not allegedly, they were doing it. They were turning guests away due to the color of their skin, which was disgraceful. And it was shocking to people inside the company that a host would actually behave this way. And when I thought about it, I thought, why were we so shocked? Racism exists everywhere. Yeah. So we should have actually been surprised. We should have actually anticipated it and put measures in place to prevent it. Why didn't we anticipate something as obvious as racism? And the answer, of course, was that we weren't very diverse as a leadership team. You looked around the leadership room, you saw very little diversity. Most of us had never been discriminated against. I'd never been discriminated against. Certainly wasn't top of mind for me because I had never gone through it. But if you ensure that you've got a diverse team, you aren't going to miss things the way that you would miss things as if you all look the same. If you all look the same and have the same background, you're going to miss so much. So I think we view diversity as a superpower, not just diversity, but also belonging. When I mean belonging, I mean, it's not just enough to check a box and say you've got a certain number of people of this gender and this race and this nationality, but do they feel that they belong and can actually do their best work in the culture of your company? So you actually have to make sure that people's voices are truly, not only are they allowed in the room, but they're welcomed and they are appreciated and respected. And that takes time because the downside of diversity is you're all different. It means you got to learn to work together. You got to learn how to respect and listen to different points of view. And that's a journey I think every company struggles with. But I think that we believe that fundamentally we're lost without diversity, because Airbnb is built on the idea that we want to increase human interaction among people who are different. We believe that immersive travel is actually a way to bring the world closer together. And so we've got to start inside of our own company. We've got to make sure that we're bringing together people of different backgrounds in order to do our best work.
So, like the example that you've just given around diversity and racial discrimination is what you describe as code red. What happens inside an organization that is practicing intentional integrity when a code red is declared? Because you can't possibly plan for every scenario.
No, I think that, a code red obviously is when something big has gone wrong and you've got to deal with it. And look, Kathy, that's going to happen anywhere. Airbnb's had them. And I think we, really work hard to try to have a culture of, not only a diverse culture, but a culture that acts with integrity. But integrity doesn't mean perfection. If it meant perfection, then no one would have integrity. I think what you need to do is when a big event happens, you need to be able to step back. Again, relate what's happened to your purpose and understand where did you go wrong. And you got to have the self-awareness to say, I made a mistake. We didn't handle that very well. And then be specific about what you're going to do to get back on that track again. What you can't do is ignore it. And I think a lot of times companies either ignore it or they're very defensive about it. And that defensiveness, I think, comes across as a lack of appreciation for the mistake. So, what I encourage companies to do is step away from defensiveness, own it a little bit, right? And I think it'd been very easy for Airbnb to say, oh, wasn't us. We didn't discriminate. Yeah, there were some hosts over there that did it, but we told them not to do it. And it's really not our fault. We're only a platform. I think that sort of thing doesn't play well, and the world wants more from you, particularly if you're a large, successful company. They want to see you own the problem. They want you to say, you know what? We are so deeply disappointed that this has happened on our platform. And we are determined to work and do our very best to ensure that it doesn't happen anymore. Because we find it as offensive as you do. And I think that's a better way to handle it.
Yeah. What I found really interesting, and I'll relate a story that happened to me. I once asked an ethics question of a lawyer, and the response was, I got case law back. These are the examples. And I thought, well, yeah, okay, but I'm asking a question as another human being. Could I please have an answer? And what I found about your book was how I could relate to the storytelling, the examples, it was simplified. Do you think there's a role for our legal community to really start to use more storytelling to help people to understand issues?
Lawyers tend to want to go right to the law.
Yeah.
And nothing will turn people off faster than that. When I talked to you earlier about the orientation session that we do on ethics and integrity at Airbnb, I would go teach it every week. And my first rule was, I'm not going to use any legal terms. I'm not going to talk about the law. It was all storytelling. It's all, here are a dozen things that have actually happened to people at Airbnb, ethical dilemmas that people have been involved in, careers that have gone sideways, embarrassing episodes. And we talk about the stories. And that people love to do. People love to learn with stories. And I think that's a tool. I think a lot of lawyers, good lawyers, understand this and use that. To be a great lawyer, it's more than just knowing the law and being able to cite it. I think that's just the beginning. I think you need to be a storyteller if you want to be effective.
So I guess last question, what is the one takeaway from your book when you sat down to write it with your co-writer? What did you want people to get?
That integrity is something that it's contagious, and it's on you as a leader to create the environment. I like to say that a leader is a thermostat for integrity at a company. not a thermometer. A thermometer takes the temperature of a room. A thermostat sets it. As a leader, you've got the hand on the thermostat. You're the one, by your words and your actions, that is creating the environment where everyone lives. If you talk about doing things with integrity, if your actions say that you really want to do things the right way, you have a deep, powerful influence on everyone in the company. You are creating that temperature. On the other hand, if you're stomping around saying, we have to hit this number no matter what, right? I don't care what it takes, just get it done. Then you are setting the thermostat in a very different place. So my message is integrity is a critical part of your job description as a leader. And you've got to embrace it. You've got to get over the fear. You've got to talk about it. But if you do, you can have a powerful influence on all those around you. And ultimately, I think, be much more successful as a business or be more successful in government. Look, Kathy, I wish government would, people in government would do this more. What should your North Star be if you're a politician? In my mind, your North Star ought to be good government, doing, serving the people and coming to the best result for the group that you represent. Too often, I see people in politics acting as if their North Star is to get reelected. What they care about is reelection, or how can they use their position to get something, whether it be money or sex. I hope as part of this talk and as part of the book, people will do some serious thinking about what's their North Star. And when they make decisions and when they act, what kind of a message are they sending? Are they really governed by what their North Star ought to be, or is it something else? And if so, they need to change.
Thanks, Rob, for joining us. It's been a great conversation, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
I'd love it. Thanks for having me, Kat.
Thanks.